Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Nassiri, and each week I interview military veterans about their civilian career. Today's episode number 107 with Eli Crane.
I told my wife, hey, we're going to do this when I get out of the military. Now, that was a tough pill for her to swallow because and you can't really blame her. If you ever tell your wife that you're going to get out of the service and sell bottle openers, she might think that you've been around too many explosions. She might think that you're crazy.
I'll make you an offer. I like the story. It's very simple. I've made money with military guys because they're focused. I'll do it for 20%. Straight equity.
Wow, I'm honored to get that offer from you, sir.
No.
I really am.
You know why?
I never thought I'd get an offer like that from you.
I like your story.
That's awesome.
Listen, I structure my deals based on the risk I'm taking. And I think this business can be grown.
Well, folks, you are going to love today's interview. You may have seen Eli on ABC's hit show, The Shark Tank, where he wrestled a deal with Mark Cuban and Kevin O'Leary for $150,000 for a company he started while on active duty, already making $1 million a year by the time he was on the show. Top 4 reasons to listen to this show. First of all, starting a company on active duty. Second of all, growth of an empire. He talks about how it started with just a goal of making $500 a month, and within 6 months was doing $22,000 a month while still on active duty. And within 18 months of starting his company, he was doing $80,000 a month, all while still on active duty. Number 3, advice on Shark Tank. He gives extremely candid advice of what his process was like, what veterans can do to increase their chances of getting on the show. And number 4, persistence and scrappiness. He talks about having a PhD and making failures, and has a lot of great tips for anyone thinking about starting their own company. Quick note, Eli recommends 2 books, one by Mark Cuban and the second Rich Dad, Poor Dad. As a reminder, our sponsor is Audible.com, who is providing a free audiobook of your choice at beyondtheuniform.io/books. If you sign up, not only do you get a free book, you can listen to Rich Dad, Poor Dad for free while you're driving around, but also Beyond the Uniform gets a little bit of money to help offset the cost of this show. So with that, let's dive in to my interview with Eli. Joining me today in Tucson, Arizona is Eli Crane. Eli, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Justin.
So for listeners, wanted to give some quick background on Eli. He is the founder and CEO of Bottle Breacher, a company that creates handcrafted 50 caliber bottle openers made by military veterans. As president of Bottle Breacher, as founder and CEO of Bottle Breacher, he's grown their annual revenue to over $5 million in 2015, applied for and received 7 patents, and negotiated a partnership on ABC's hit show, The Shark Tank, with Mark Cuban and Kevin O'Leary. He started out in the Navy, where he served as a SEAL for over 15 years, and he started Bottle Breacher while on active duty and has run the company for nearly 5 years now. So Eli, just maybe to start off, anything to add to or amend to that introduction?
No, that's great. I think other than I just became a contributor to entrepreneur.com, so I'm looking forward to doing that as well.
That's awesome. Well, for listeners' background, I came across Eli. I was watching with my wife Shark Tank and saw him there. I will link to the clip in the show notes, but saw him negotiating with Mark Cuban himself, which was impressive to say the least, and they loved what he was doing. So very excited to share his story with the community. Eli, maybe to start out, I'd love to learn about going back to your time in the Navy. How did you make that decision to transition from the Navy?
Well, that's a great question. I actually joined the Navy the week after 9/11, like thousands of other Americans, and I did it because I felt like the country really needed a bunch of us to step up and do what was right and go fight evil. And so after 5 deployments in the Navy, and I had 2 little girls at home, I felt like I'd done what I came to do, and I was looking for a new challenge, and I wanted to be around to watch my daughters grow up. So it was a pretty easy decision for me.
That's awesome. And I saw in your background that you worked at a company called Acumen Performance Group while on active duty. What was that role about, and what did you learn while you were there?
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up because not many people do. But that was actually the first company that I was a founder in. I was actually the 7th member brought on board and was an equal equity share partner in the company, and it was phenomenal. We were taking what we had learned in the SEAL teams about mental toughness and just in our physical training and applying that to corporate groups and professional and collegiate and even Olympic sporting teams, and it was phenomenal. We had a great time, but it just wasn't moving quickly enough for me since I was getting out of the Navy in a couple of years. So I had to actually leave in 2014 and come to run Bottle Breacher full time.
And what was that starting point? What was that genesis of Bottle Breacher?
Yes, great question. So in 2009, my little brother brought me a backup gift from the Philippines, and I thought it was one of the coolest things I'd ever received, and so did so many of the guys that would come over to my house to have beers with me, and they would always ask, where can I get one of these? Well, I'd never seen them in the States, and neither had they. So in 2012, I decided I'm going to take this really cool product that my little brother gave me, and I'm going to make it a lot better. And so I went out to the garage, and I painted it black. I put a Punisher sticker on it, and I polished it up quite a bit. And when I saw the reaction on my buddy's face when I took it into work the next day, everybody was asking me to produce and make some for them, for every guy in their family as a Christmas gift. And it was at that point that I realized that there was a lot more to this than me trying to make something cool. And so I just would buy dummy ammunition. I would take a Dremel tool that I already owned. I would put a cut in there that would, a really rugged cut in there that would open a beer bottle. I would paint these things with, primer, spray paint. I'd put stickers on them, and then I'd polish up the tips, and that's how we kind of started this whole thing. And after doing that for a little while, I asked my wife if she would help me market and sell these online. She did some market research. She thought that Etsy would be a really good place to start, and so that's how Bottle Breacher was born.
That's so awesome. And at what point did you say, like, this is, I'm going full time on this? Like, what tipped you over? Like, at what point did it turn from just a cool hobby with your friends and with your wife to, like, this could actually be what you do?
No, that's another great question, and this is one of the most difficult decisions for any entrepreneur to make, is when do I make that transition from hobby to business? And for me, it's funny because when I started out, I just wanted to make something cool, and then when I saw the response of everybody, my initial thought was, I just want to make $500 extra a month for supplemental income, maybe a date night, or maybe to save up for the next gun I want to buy. And I realized real quickly the first month that we started, January 2013, we did 375 in gross sales, and so I was like, wow, we're $125 from my goal. Fast forward 6 months, we were doing $7,500 a month out of that one car garage, and it just blew me away because I never thought we'd even come close to doing that kind of revenue. And it was at that time that we were watching the show Shark Tank a lot, and I remember one specific episode really was a game changer for Jen and I. We were sitting there watching it on the couch, and there was this guy on the show that had this green suit that he was making for people to wear at on the ski slopes, at football games, sporting events. It was a full body neon green suit that would really make you stand out and get you a lot of attention, I guess. And he was actually doing pretty well for himself. He had about $300,000 in annual sales, and the Sharks were interested in his product, but I'll never forget something Kevin O'Leary said to him. Kevin O'Leary pulled it out of the package and was looking at it, and he said, I don't see your brand on here anywhere. Do you put your name on it? And he said, no. And Kevin said, well, do you have any competitors out there? And the guy said, well, we do, but we never really thought about it. And he said, that's one of the biggest mistakes you can make as an entrepreneur, and for that reason, I'm out. And so I looked at Jen and I was like, wow, we got to figure out how to put bottle breacher on each one of these 50 caliber bottle openers that's leaving the garage. And so I started doing some research, and my research led me to laser engraving. And laser engravers, for anybody out there that has worked with them or know anything about them, they're not cheap. Most of them cost between 20 and 30 grand if you buy a good model, and even the used ones, are about $10,000, $15,000. I had about $30,000 in my savings account, so I could have taken my family's nest egg and risked it on a laser engraver, or an unknown, as I like to call it. But what I did was I took my beautiful 2004 Big Dog K9 motorcycle. I sold that, I think, for $11,000, and I bought a used laser engraver for $10,500. So it was like an even swap. And what I like to tell people is what I really did is I sold a liability, something that cost me money, and I bought an asset, something that was going to make me money. And the coolest thing, probably the best financial move I've ever made, because within a month and a half, we went from doing $7,500 a month that I just referenced to $22,000 a month in a month and a half. And it wasn't because we were able to brand and put the Bottle Breacher logo on each and every one, though we did start doing that. What it allowed us to do, it allowed us to get into the personalization business and, in essence, the groomsmen market, and start putting names and dates and any personal message you wanted on the back of the Bottle Breacher. And so it was at that point right there, when you're doing $22,000 a month of gross sales out of your garage, 9 months into a business, you start to see the magic, and you're like, this isn't normal. We're really onto something. And it was at that point that I told my wife, hey, we're going to do this when I get out of the military. Now, that was a tough pill for her to swallow, because and you can't really blame her. If you ever tell your wife that you're going to get out of the service and sell bottle openers, she might think that you've been around too many explosions. She might think that you're crazy. But I saw it. We kept on top of it. I was able to convince her to continue helping me until we could continue hiring more people. And that's kind of when I made the decision that this was going to be a lot more than a hobby.
I love that. That's so awesome. And how much longer was it until you made that transition to civilian life?
So from that point, it probably would have been another 14, 15 months.
Wow. Okay. So what was that like? Like, how did you, $22,000 a month is incredible. I'm just wondering, what was your life like running a company and on active duty? Like, were you just working around the clock, or what? How did you make that work?
Yeah, more or less I was. And I credit the ability to do that to a lot of my SEAL training. It might sound kind of cliche and kind of corny, but, there's so many times in SEAL training where you have to stay up weeks at a time and, just get your butt kicked the entire time and be cold, wet, and miserable the entire time. So once you go through training like that, what I like to tell people is it kind of resets your baseline. What other people think is hard no longer means hard to you. It means blah. It means nothing. And when you start seeing the world through a different lens, and your hard becomes impossible to some people, you can do a lot more than a lot of people are willing to do. And so what we started doing, I was an instructor in the Navy at the time, and I would go to work during the day. Sometimes we would work, past dinner into the night. At that point, I really didn't have to be gone for the most part. Every once in a while I had to be gone like a week at a time, but I wasn't gone a ton when we were starting this business. And so for the most part, I usually had nights and weekends, to work on Bottle Breacher. And that's exactly what we did. We would stay, I think me and my wife, our average bedtime for that last 2 years was probably 1 a.m. Sometimes it would even stretch to like 3 a.m, and then we would get up, do it all over again. There were no weekends. And I kind of feel bad about it because we had 2 little girls at the time, and they definitely had to sacrifice time with mom and dad as well. And they probably didn't get to do a lot of the activities that, some of their friends were doing. But I'll tell you what, right now, they get to do a lot more activities than they ever have now that we've turned the corner with this thing. And most importantly, the most valuable thing for them is they got to see mom and dad work like nobody's willing to work, and that's something I hope they take with them the rest of their lives, because this country, it's still possible to live the American dream if you're willing to work for it, and I'm really glad that my daughters got to see that.
That's awesome. I love that the most rewarding aspect. I can only imagine how much personal and professional growth this has been. I can only imagine how much your wife and you have grown together by running this company. But I love that one of the biggest impacts is just that example for your kids of showing them that you're willing to follow your dream and you're willing to really roll up your sleeves and work for it. I think that's really inspiring.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it has been really inspiring. So basically, if you fast forward a year from that, that time where I told you we were doing $22,000 a month, we just bought our first laser engraver. The following summer, we were doing $80,000 a month out of that one-car garage. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand. Even in year 2 in this company, we were projected to do close to $1 million in gross sales out of that one-car garage before going on the Shark Tank. So this company, it was magical. It was taking off. The Shark Tank just poured gasoline on it, but there was no doubt in my mind, even if we didn't get on the Shark Tank, that we were going to blow this thing up.
That's what I loved about your story is it wasn't really a product when you went on Shark Tank. It was a company by that point. It was exactly as you said. You guys were successful one way or another, but that was certainly a help. What was that application process like? And I'm curious if you have any advice for veterans looking to go down this process as well.
Yeah, if there are veterans that want to get on the Shark Tank, I think it's a great opportunity for you. I have noticed, and I'll share this with your audience, that I typically find that the sharks tend to be a little bit more respectful when they have a veteran entrepreneur in there. Now, that does no way, shape, or form means that they're going to give you a deal, because I've seen so many veterans walk out of there without a deal. As a matter of fact, our episode in season 6, the Veterans Day special, there were 4 veterans on the show. 2 of us got deals, 2 of us didn't. So it doesn't mean you're going to get a deal, but I have noticed that they tend to be pretty respectful when you go in there. So that's great. If you want to go down this process, it's just set your expectations up realistically. There's about 40,000 people that apply for that show every single year, and I think about 170 of those 40,000 applicants fly out to LA to tape, and I think it's even less out of those 170 people that tape actually get their episodes aired. And if you want your episode, if you make it past that point, if you actually get to fly out to Sony Picture Studios and you get to tape, that doesn't mean that your episode's going to air. And then if your episode airs, you can be prepared to watch your business, whether you get a deal or not, usually grow by about 700% the following year. So you better be ready for it. But if you do want to get on the show, the best advice that I would give you is make sure that you prove your concept. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand. People that want to be entrepreneurs, people, that watch the show. Basically, proving your concept doesn't mean that you've got a prototype and you've got a patent pending. Proving your concept means that you're manufacturing these products, or you've got this service up and running and people are actually paying you for it. Not just paying you for it, but they're paying you enough for it to where you can actually support yourself and grow your business. That's a big difference right there. Some people haven't bridged that threshold to where they're even cash flow positive yet. So if you want to go on that show, you gotta put yourself in the shoes of the sharks, right? They have deal after deal after deal after deal getting pitched to them. Even when they're not on the show, they're getting pitched deals all day long. So if you were them, you would want to take the low-hanging fruit. You would want to take the businesses and the companies that are well established and pretty much a slam dunk. So they want to know you have a proof of concept. They want to know that people are going to open their wallets and pay for your product all day, every day. They also want to know that you have a vision for how to scale your business. How are you going to take this one product or this one concept and turn it into 10 or 20 products and really increase their money? And they also want to know that you're not going to be a pain in the ass to work with, and you can do a pretty good job, portraying to them while they're asking you questions, just by being respectful and taking some of their advice, that you're not really going to be a pain in the butt. And the last thing you need to do to them is you want to prove to them that you're resilient. And that, thankfully for us, I think that was one of the best parts of our pitch, is that we proved to them, by me talking about failing SEAL training the first time and Jen not getting into business school the first time, that when we don't get what we want, when we fail, we don't run for the hills. We figure it out, we regroup, and then we get right back to it. And if you're going to invest with somebody, that's one of the biggest things you need to look for, is people that are resilient. You need to prove that you're resilient, whether it's sharing something about your life, a time you didn't quit. That's one of the most important things you can do.
That's great. I think that's exceptional advice. What was the timing like from, let's say that you submit an application to filming to actually having it go live? What was the timing on all of that?
Right. So, I actually got out of the Navy in October. Our episode filmed in November. The summer prior to that, I had probably in February or March, I submitted an online application. I didn't hear anything back, and I was kind of surprised because we had a phenomenal product, a phenomenal story, phenomenal numbers, and it really kind of bummed me out. But I found out that a couple months later, they were going to be doing an open casting call in San Diego for the next season, for season 6. And so luckily, it was only 10 minutes from my house, so I knew I had to be there. I knew I was going to be there. And I found out when I showed up the night before that the first 500 people were guaranteed to pitch to a casting director. And I knew that if I could just pitch to somebody, because I didn't even know if anybody even saw my email, but I knew if I could just pitch to somebody that could actually hear my pitch and make a decision, yay or nay, I could at the very least walk away from it knowing that I'd done everything I could to get on the show. Somebody, that worked for Shark Tank actually heard my pitch, saw the product, heard the numbers, and they just said, no, we're not what you're looking for. I could live with that. What I couldn't live with was, not knowing whether anybody had ever heard or, got a chance to, understand how awesome this small startup that we were running was all about. So I got in line, I think at 1 a.m, and I think I was number 156 or something like that out of the first 500. And I didn't get to pitch till 1 in the afternoon, but when I finally did get to pitch, and I didn't even memorize my speech, when I went in there, I had the stats from my phone, so she could actually, I had my Etsy app live, so she could see how much revenue we were actually doing. It's one thing to tell somebody, hey, yeah, we're doing $80,000 a month out of a one-car garage 10 minutes down the road, but it's another thing to show her, hey, this is exactly how many. You see this live app right here? This is exactly how much revenue we're doing. This is how many views we've had. This is how many orders we've done. This is the average order, cost. I showed her all of the live data so she could see that I wasn't full of it. And then I showed her several examples of the product, and I asked her just point blank, how many men in your life would love to have one of these products? One of these large caliber bullets that has their name on the back. I showed her the personalization, and I told her, and it can open their beer. And she said, pretty much every guy I know. It's kind of a no-brainer, and that's why we've sold so many of them. And so they told us before we walked into that room, you probably won't hear from us for a week or two if you even do. Out of the 1,000 people that showed up today, maybe 1 or 2 of you will get selected. So that was on a Saturday afternoon. Monday morning, I had an email in my inbox saying, congratulations, we love the pitch, you're making it to the next round. You have 1 week to make us a video. So we made a video, submitted that. That video was going to be watched by some of the producers at Shark Tank. And then 2 weeks later, I got a phone call after I just dropped off our daily orders from the post office in Point Loma, San Diego, and they said, hey, they love the video. We're going to assign you 2 producers to work with you once a week. You and Jen are going to get on the phone with these guys. They're going to go over your pitch. They're going to ask you questions, and you're just going to brainstorm and talk strategy with them. So once a week, every Friday afternoon, I think at 4 o'clock, we would get on the phone with 2 guys, one named Michael, one named Alan, and they would just grill us. And that went on for probably, I think, maybe 6 to 8 weeks. And then we got to fly out to LA, do the pre-pitch. They liked, just because they fly you out doesn't mean you're going to actually get to pitch to the Sharks. First, you have to go through pre-pitch. If they like that, if the producers and directors at Shark Tank think you project well and think you're going to make great TV, then they'll call you that night, and they'll say, hey, you're coming back to pitch to the Sharks tomorrow, or we're going to fly you home. So Thankfully, our pre-pitch went well. We got to pitch the very next day. We were the very last pitch of the day. We got in there into the tank at 4 p.m. The Sharks, you could tell, were tired. I think they'd had like a 9 or 10 hour day hearing pitches, and you could just tell they were burnt out. And I think we started to see them wake up and really realize what was in front of them. When Jen and I talked about, hey, we've been this year, 6 months into the year, we've done $500,000 in revenue. And then once they got the bottle breachers in their hand and got to see what it was all about, the rest was smooth sailing.
And the beer, you gave them all beers, right?
Yeah, it was funny because they told us that we'd be allowed to get the Sharks their favorite beers. And so our producers found out what their favorite beers were. Me and Jen ran around Los Angeles the night before trying to find their favorite beers. And Mark Cuban was actually gluten-free at the time, so we had to find a specialty beer for them. And then we bought a cooler. We had it on ice. We brought it with us to the set, and then like 10 minutes before we went on, one of the casting guy, or one of the guys that was doing managing the props, he came up and said, "Hey Eli, just to make everything simple, we're going to give them all this. We're going to give them all the same beer. It's all gluten-free." And I was like, "Hey, it's your show, your call. Do whatever you want." And so it was funny, and this didn't show up on the actual episode, but the Sharks said, "Hey, let's toast." So we all breachered up. We all took out our bottle breacher and we opened a beer, and mine exploded all over the set. And so, like a champion, I just continued mission. I chugged this foaming beer, and it was hilarious because probably 5 or 10 minutes later, while we're still pitching and answering questions, Jen was standing next to me, and she leans in and she kind of whispers, "There's beer in your mustache." And I was like, "Oh no," because you're looking for, you don't want to give them any reason not to air your show. And so it was just kind of funny how that whole thing went down. But it was a phenomenal experience, like I said, for us, and we're really excited, for the future.
Well, I'm wondering, what was it like? So, in the final moments of your episode, you broker this deal. You kind of corral Mark into the deal, and you give up 20% of the company for $150,000 with two incredible Sharks, Kevin O'Leary and Mark Cuban. What was it like in that moment? I mean, you've been in so many stressful situations, but what was that like, being on the precipice of getting this deal and feeling like this is all hanging in the balance?
Well, it was just pretty amazing, to be honest with you. I mean, any entrepreneur can tell you how hard it is just to get a business up and rolling, and when you've worked your butt off for a couple of years and you've really put in the sweat equity and sacrificed, hanging out with your friends, and you've done a lot more with less, and you've sacrificed your finances so you can reinvest capital into your business, and then you get to watch a situation like that is going to be life-changing unfold right in front of your eyes. It is pretty magical, and fortunately for me, I think up to that point I had lived such an amazing life anyway, that it really didn't, it was funny because before we got ready to go out onto the Shark Tank, my wife was pacing around the green room and she's like, "Eli, you seem too relaxed. I need you to get fired up." A lot of whether we succeed or not is kind of hinging on, you showing up and, having some personality. And I told her, I was like, "Babe, relax. When I need to get fired up and when I need to, be on, I will." But I'd learned after years and years in the military of waiting around that if you just spin yourself up, you're really just burning your energy and really not doing yourself any good. So it was really surreal. It was really a surreal situation. But I really felt that the only way we wouldn't come out of the deal in the Shark Tank, just based on our story, based on the numbers that we had, and based on the product and the vision for the future, I really felt the only thing that was going to keep us from getting a deal was just the nature of our product, and that it was not a politically correct product. So, I was really confident that we were going to get a deal, and when we got a deal, it was awesome. But then, that very night, Jen and I went out to dinner after getting a deal, and of course my wife, I was wanting to celebrate, and my wife, she was on her computer, sending emails and trying to prepare. So it's just how it works out sometimes.
Like you said before, just being on the show alone, 700% growth is going to come from that. I'm curious, how have Mark Cuban and Kevin O'Leary helped the company so far, and how have they helped you as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so they've helped us out. They've helped us out quite a bit. I think the biggest thing that entrepreneurs can expect if they do invest with Mark Cuban, or if he does invest in you, is he will connect you with Mark Cuban companies in Dallas, Texas, and I think it's a organization that has about probably 25 or 30 people in it, and their sole reason for existence is to help a Shark Tank company. So Mark's a really busy guy. You got to be really realistic about that. He owns many companies. He's on the board for a ton of companies. He has about over 70 Shark Tank companies. So you're not going to get a ton of personal time from Mark. You just have to understand that going in. But he is going to help you. Usually when we come out with new products, Mark will, put them out on his social media for us and help us promote them. So that's really cool that he does that. With Kevin O'Leary, Kevin's been a little bit more hands-on. He's been down to Tucson actually twice, and he also helps us try and promote new products. And he also, when he can and when he finds something he thinks will fit, he also tries to help us get into some good deals. So, it's just, they all have their strengths. I think they all have their weaknesses like the rest of us, and you just have to find, what works for you.
That's great. That's so funny to hear, because I get so jaded sometimes when I watch the show with my wife. I'll say, like $100,000 or $75,000 in this case that Mark Cuban gives to you for the equity stake. For him, coming from a billionaire, that's like me investing a penny. It's such a small amount of money. So I wonder how attached would they be to the company's success. But it's great to hear that both of them in different ways have been very supportive of your company and your growth.
Right, I think you're right. From a strictly money standpoint, it's not much of an investment, but I think what you have to realize is that it's an investment that they just made on national television. So people ask them all the time, how's this company doing? How's that company doing? And so they are tied to it. And so, because their investment is, very well publicly known and on the public stage, I think that does give them a little bit more incentive than, the average investor, to participate and make sure that their companies succeed.
That's great. I'm curious, you've been in this game for 5 years. It sounds like an incredibly exhilarating ride. What has been one of the more challenging aspects of starting and running your own company?
Right. I think for me, I think one of the biggest difficulties for me is just the fact that my wife and I partnered up together. I think that's honestly one of the most difficult things that you can do. And I don't recommend it to most people because it really can take its toll on, your marriage and your relationship. But I will tell you this, if you're able to work it out with your spouse, it does have its advantages. And if you're able to work it out, I think it will bring you guys closer together than you probably ever have, just because you have to rely on each other so much and trust each other so much. So I think that's definitely been one of the most difficult things about starting this business.
That's actually the next question I was going to ask, is just advice for any veteran listening who might be thinking of starting a company with their spouse or a family member. It sounds like the first piece of advice might be don't do it or reconsider it. But any other words of wisdom for how they might, things that have helped you that might help them?
Absolutely. I think one of the best things that they can do is try and grow organically. That's so important. I mean, if you really look at statistics and you understand what your biggest enemy is, in starting a business, 99% of the time it's running out of cash, right? I mean, they say within the first 5 years, 95% of businesses, they go under because they run out of cash. And after that, in the next 5 years, the 5% that did make it through the first 5 years, 95% of those businesses go under because they ran out of cash. And so if you make up your mind that you're going to grow organically, and when I say organically, I mean that you're going to buy what you can afford, and not take out, huge loans and go out and seek investors really early on. I think what it allows you to do is it allows you to grow at a reasonable pace that your sales can support. And it also doesn't allow you to get over your head, with by financing, equipment and, hiring people you really can't afford. So if you're able to grow organically, I highly encourage it. Now you might say that sounds kind of, sounded kind of funny from a guy that, took on 2 investors, but keep in mind, I didn't take on those investors till probably about 2.5 years into this, when we were already close to $1 million in revenue annually. So I do encourage it really, really early on that, guys and gals try and grow as organically as possible for as long as possible. The other thing that I really think that vets should really look at, if they're going to be starting up a business, is really the whole mission aspect. I think it's so important, and I think that's why one of the reasons a lot of veterans struggle when they get out is because many of us were very mission-centric. We always want to be doing something that's bigger than ourselves. We always want to be doing something for the greater good, if you will. And I think a lot of veterans, when they get into the private sector and they realize that their 9-to-5 job or whatever they're doing, it's all about just making a paycheck, getting insurance, and making sure they can provide for their family and maybe stock away a little, money in their savings account. They really struggle because they're not doing anything bigger than themselves. It's all about, self-promotion and, providing. And so I feel like if you're able to find something in your life, in your community, in your area, that is mission oriented, where you can still do something greater, bigger and greater than yourself, that's a really big key to, carrying on what you were doing in the service, and also life satisfaction.
That's great. I wanted to ask about any resources you would recommend. I imagine, there's so many different skills that you had to develop since leaving the military, and I'm wondering if there's any books or courses or conferences or websites that you would recommend to a veteran who's aspiring to start their own company?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my favorite book that I think taught me a lot about business is Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And I love that book because most of us did not grow up and get any sort of financial education at all. And that book will take it and break it down for you in the most simplest of terms. And basically what it teaches you is that what most people do is they spend their lives and their money buying liabilities or things that cost them money, like homes and shoes and cars and stuff like that. And it teaches you that if you want to become wealthy, what you need to do is you need to buy assets or things that make you money. And that's really hard because most of us don't have any patience. And as soon as we get money, we want to spend it, on and keep up with the Joneses, if you will, and buy that new car, or get that new dress, or whatever it is, that whatever consumer product that we that has caught our attention lately. And I love the book because in business it's the same thing. If you want to, there's a reason that my desk is still my office table, because it's functional. I can put my computer on it, and it didn't cost me any money. I didn't have to shell out, $500, $1,000 for a new desk. Even though I may buy a new desk someday, the point is that book taught me a lot about, how the wealthy become wealthy, and it also taught me that, you don't need to see wealth through the typical lens that most people see it through, and that a lot of people think that capitalism and business owners are all greedy, money hungry people, and that's all that they're all about. It also taught me that if you want to do any of these charitable things that you're about, and take care of other people, that wealth, it's a priority. It needs to be essential. So it taught me how to build wealth, and that's one of the most important things that you can learn if you want to start a successful business. So I highly recommend Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Awesome. I also wanted to ask, you had, it wasn't like you went straight from the military to starting your company. You did have that experience at Acumen Performance Group. And I'm curious, for anyone listening who's thinking of starting their own company, would you advise them to try to get experience working somewhere else or starting something else first? Or do you think it's best to just dive straight in?
Well, that's a great question. I think hopefully that, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, hopefully even if you're working for somebody right now, you've got your eyes open and you're learning from other people's mistakes, right? You're learning from the mistakes that your leaders are making, or you're noticing, what they're doing that's, working out really well. So you have to have your eyes open, whether you're working for somebody else or not. I do recommend, if you want to be an entrepreneur and you have the means to do it, if you have the free time, if you have enough capital, if the business that you want to start can be started for relatively cheaply, that you do it as soon as possible. And the reason I recommend that is because if you talk to any successful entrepreneur, they'll all pretty much can tell you that they have a PhD in learning to overcome failure. And most of us have a long laundry list of things that we failed at in the past, but most of us have learned to see failure in a different light. We see it differently than everybody else. We're not afraid of it. We actually welcome it, because we know that if you're failing, that means you're attempting to get outside your comfort zone and, actually grow as a human being and grow as a professional and grow as an entrepreneur. So we don't see failure the way that most people see it. So I would encourage you to get out there, don't be afraid of failure, and go out there and start a business. And Mark Cuban in his book says one of the most profound statements, and it's so simple and it's so true, and I think it always will be. He says, you only have to be right once. And it's so true. You only have to be right once. You're going to swing for the fences a lot of time, and probably, you're probably not going to hit one out of the park on your first try or your second try or your third try, but if you connect on that fourth pitch, or that fourth company that you start, and you take all the lessons for why you swung and missed the first, second, and third time, eventually you're going to figure out what it takes. And the other thing you'll learn from a lot of entrepreneurs that are successful is that a lot of entrepreneurs can go directly from one business to the next because they develop what works for them. And it doesn't even matter anymore what the product or service is. They just know how to take care of people. They know how to develop solid products, and they know how to project, and they know how to, have a vision for the future. So, I highly recommend, if you want to start a business, go out there, start a business, and don't be afraid of failure. Welcome it.
That's awesome. Well, I always like to keep the last question open-ended, and honestly, Eli, I have to say, watching you on Shark Tank, I just think the way you handled yourself, the way you interacted with the sharks, the way you interacted with your wife, it just spoke so highly of that veteran background. And I appreciate that example and all the incredible things you've shared with me and with our listeners today. But I always like to keep the last question open-ended and just say, knowing that you have an audience of veterans and active duty military personnel listening, any final words of wisdom or anything else you'd want to share with them?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to double tap on the mission thing that I talked about. I think that's one of the most important things for us, and I think that veterans, whether they start a business or go work for somebody else, they need to find that mission, and they need to keep making the world a better place for others. And if they don't do that, they're going to really struggle. The next thing I want to talk about is I want to encourage your listeners that are entrepreneurs that want to start their own business, and encourage you and tell you that the biggest things that a lot of entrepreneurs want to go out and they want to get an MBA, they want to go to business school. The most important things to become an entrepreneur are not taught in business school. Okay, so you can go out and hire somebody that can be an accountant for you. You can go out and hire a marketing expert. You can go out and hire an engineer. You can go out and hire IT people. You can go out and hire anybody you need. What you really need to do, most of us coming from the veteran walk of life already have, and that's one, resiliency. You have to be resilient. You have to be able to come in every single day and be ready to get knocked down and hit with something that you didn't see coming, which leads me into my next thing. Two, you have to be able to problem solve. That's probably the biggest thing. And this is something I love about my training in the SEAL teams, is that they taught us that a good decision now is better than a great decision later. You see these people all the time, they get hit with, this problem, and instead of, taking the information that they have now and making the best decision possible, they'll get analysis paralysis, and they'll start, overanalyzing and nuking everything. And before you know it, a week has gone by, they still don't have a decision, and the competition is, way out ahead of them. Okay, so those are the first two things that you need. Then you need teamwork. Okay, we all know how to do this, right? you will never get anywhere really by yourself unless you develop a team, because we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, and your job needs to be, as the CEO or president of your business, you need to surround yourself with people that are strong where you are weak. So we all know how to do this. None of us went out into combat or did anything in the military by ourselves. And the last thing you need to do if you want to start a business successfully, which we already all learned in the military, is you have to take the fight to the enemy. You have to stay on the offensive. You have to keep your competitors reacting to you, and you have to move at lightning speed. So I think I want to encourage you guys out there that are entrepreneurs listening to this, because you already have the major tools. We were all taught those tools in the military. The accounting, the marketing, all that stuff, it's very important, but you can surround yourself with people that are willing to do them. I'm sure you're probably able to do at least one or two of them yourself, and you probably will, but don't let any of that, not being good at any of that stuff, hold you back from starting your own business.
Such great advice, Eli. I appreciate your candor on this. I just find it very uplifting and encouraging to hear your advice. I know that our listeners will benefit from it. For listeners, you can find everything we discussed in the show notes at beyondtheuniform.io. You can find Eli at bottlebreacher.com. All their products are made in the U.S. by military veterans. It is an organization that gives back to veterans. It employs veterans, so check it out. It's a lot of great stuff there. Thank you so much for your time, Eli.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Surface.
All right, thank you for listening. I am looking forward to seeing other veterans on Shark Tank soon. Hopefully you found this information as inspiring as I did. Couple quick announcements. First of all, you can sign up for our newsletter at beyondtheuniform.io. That's the primary means I use to keep people posted on what's going on with the show. Second of all, as a reminder, audible.com is offering a free audiobook of your choice at beyondtheuniform.io/books. Sign up, get your free ebook, and help support Beyond the Uniform in producing this show. Third of all, if you are looking to apply to a college or graduate school, check out servicetoschool.org. It's a free resource to help you get into the school of your choice. Also, check out Athletes of Valor. Alex Stone, who was on the show last week, runs that organization. Being part of collegiate athletics increases your chances of being successful in school. He'll help you figure out how to get accepted to those athletic programs. Thanks, and see you next week.